It's funny. I would argue that the Beethoven symphonies work just as good, if not better, on piano than in the orchestra. Um,
Completely agree.
yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, it's funny. Okay, it's not a controversial stance in the slightest that Beethoven, was not a great orchestrator, and that's kind of beside the point, right? It's you don't listen to his music for his lush orchestration that you'll find in Korsakov or Tchaikovsky or something. And what's really fascinating about Beethoven's music is really the notes themselves, right? The actual counterpoint, the actual harmonies and melodies in the pure sense. And when you listen to them performed on piano, you hear a lot of things that would normally be covered up in an orchestral performance, especially one performed in a concert hall, where there's a certain artificial emotion kind of thrown on top of things that I don't know for sure, but I doubt Beethoven would be a fan of. And when you hear his symphonies performed on piano, you really hear very clearly the harmonies, the melodies, the counterpoint, the theory, so to speak, because there's no things being hidden or covered up by the flutes playing that passage and the second violins coming in here. The music is a lot more pure when played on piano, and when you're listening to music by Beethoven, that really kind of elevates it to a certain level, as opposed to maybe if you did piano transcriptions of other composers' works. And to even go even further, it's funny when you listen to his symphonies transcribed for piano. If for some reason you knew a lot about music, but you didn't know any of the works of Beethoven, if you were to listen to all the Beethoven piano sonatas, all 32 of them, but intermixed in that were sprinkled the Beethoven symphonies just performed on piano and not by an orchestra, you'd have a very hard time distinguishing which ones were which.
Yeah, that would be. It's a shame that his symphonies are as popular as they are, because that would be a great experiment to run on someone who's vaguely familiar with Beethoven.
Right.
Because obviously, if you tested someone who didn't know anything about Beethoven, then they wouldn't be able to tell anyway. You shouldn't expect that of them. I think it's interesting what Glenn Gould says about Beethoven being closer to Bach than we are to World War II.
Hmm.
That always strikes me as something that we forget, because Beethoven is seen as this proto-romantic composer, and it's always Beethoven, the man who is looking forward, not Beethoven, the man who is looking backwards as well. To that end, I think there are a lot of most performances of Beethoven are not really X-ray like at all. They're pretty they're played pretty romantically. They're played pretty lushly, covering up a lot of the left hand, the quote unquote left hand, whatever that may be in the instrumentation of the piece.
Beethoven was a pianist,
Yeah,
very much so.
yeah.
So he
So,
composed all of his works at the piano.
and I think it's tempting. You'll find just to play devil's advocate, you'll find someone always bringing up a few examples of places in Beethoven symphonies where it's clear that he actually wanted specific instruments, and he actually took care in orchestration. The most obvious example is going to be the cadenza, the bird cadenza, quote unquote, in the end of the second movement of Beethoven 6. But one example of an endemic orchestration does not an orchestrator make.
I mean,
So
a broken clock is right twice a day.
yeah, exactly. And so I remember what I was going to say now. So this approach to Beethoven, this X-ray approach to Beethoven, where you're really turning up the dial on the left hand, as it were. I'm not necessarily advocating that that's the only way that Beethoven should be played, or it's the right way that Beethoven should be played, or it's the way that he would have heard it or wanted it to be played, whatever. I don't care about any of those things. The fact is that that's a completely valid way to play Beethoven, and that's not that's the concert hall kind of diminishes that. It's a valid approach to Beethoven that does not really get much love, and if you played it, if you started trying to play Beethoven that way, you may not get as much love as it's a risk, and it's a risk that a lot of people who are bound by the need to have, thunderous applause at the end of a concert are not going to necessarily want to take.
Yeah.
If you it's we shouldn't be in this position where we have to trade off values. So I can imagine the sort of thought process of, okay, if I do want to play some contemporary and experimental music, I'll put that in the first half, but to balance it out and make the audience happy, I have to play Beethoven 7 in the second half. And if I play it in a weird way and they walk away with that, then I'm risking this entire concert being a failure. So if I want to play some experimental music in the first half, I have to play Beethoven 7 in the second half, and it has to be the way that Beethoven 7 goes. They have to hear that Beethoven 7 that we've all heard a million times. And
Yeah,
yeah,
it kind of becomes like, yeah, you're putting a CD back in the CD player and you're pushing play again, and you expect it to sound the same way it did.